Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Geraghty. I'm the president and founder of Making Cancer Fun, and I am the mom of a miracle kid. And I'm really excited because today we're going to be partnering and talking with Jessie Guzik, and she is with Cancer Support Community of Central New Jersey. And what's awesome about Jessie is that she actually has her master's in child life. So she is the person who's really an expert in understanding how children experience cancer. And we're going to be talking today about the emotional roller coaster that children go on, but also how that changes based on their age. You know, as parents, we have one experience, right? And we don't necessarily understand how our child is experiencing something like a cancer diagnosis differently. So Jessie's going to help us understand how that's different based on their age, how we can support them based on their age. We'll talk a little bit about how to incorporate fun into that, and hopefully empower you to feel like you can really support your child based on your circumstance. And so that could be that a child has a family member who's going through cancer that's an adult, a mom, a dad, a grandmother, a close relative, and they're experiencing cancer in that way. That could be a sibling, their brother or sister got a diagnosis, or it could be a child themselves who has a cancer diagnosis. So Jessie, why don't you share a little bit about the work that you do, your background, and how you've kind of became an expert in this field?
Sure. So as a child life specialist, typically for anyone who's ever heard of child life, you've most likely seen us in the hospital working with children who have their own diagnosis, whether that be an oncology diagnosis or anything else. We really run the gamut of where children are in pediatric hospital settings. So in that sphere, sort of, we work to support the child with their diagnosis, helping them understand in age and developmentally appropriate ways what's going on, what even does this diagnosis mean, how does it affect them, treatments, what does that look like, what does that mean for them, what are they going to experience. We support the caregivers, helping them support their child and encouraging them. Really, one thing I talk about a lot is parents know their kids best. So while we're supporting, we're also encouraging the parent to sort of be the expert in their child. And then siblings also play a part, and really anyone who is directly connected to that child is impacted by the diagnosis. So we support everyone who really touches that child in any way. And then recently, the last 2 years or so, I've moved into a community setting. So I work at Cancer Support Community, Central New Jersey, as you mentioned. It's a tongue twister. But my role there is Child and Youth Program Coordinator. And really, I work more heavily with the child who, an adult in their life, has a cancer diagnosis. So whether that's a parent or a primary caregiver, maybe a grandparent that lives in the home and is very close to them. Again, siblings, anyone who is involved with the family where a loved one has a cancer diagnosis. So really there we do things like support groups for children and families. We do a lot of social programming, so really enjoyable things that they get to come together and know that other kids around them are also dealing with something similar in their lives that's affecting them. And so then we also do some one-on-one work as well.
So you've really seen the gamut from the hospital setting to the more personal, cancer support. And if you guys aren't familiar with cancer support, you're particularly with Central New Jersey, but they are all over the country. And what initially really drew me to your organization is that you are solely focused on the emotional piece of cancer, that psychosocial experience, and dealing with whether it's an adult or a child that sometimes gets overlooked, with all of the other needs that families have financially and stuff like that, that this is really a place to deal with all those feelings about cancer. It's an amazing, if you haven't checked them out, you have to go to the website and check them out there. We'll have all the links below, but really an incredible organization of support that I wish I had known something like that existed. So just a little plug for cancer support. So when a kid hears this word cancer, has this diagnosis, what have you seen in your experience that's different based on the age, the age of the child and what they're going to experience from their emotions? Like, how are their emotions going to change based on their age?
Sure. So I think really even, starting at infancy and toddlerhood, that child's feeling that impact. So whether or not, the child understands the word cancer and what that means, they're still feeling it. So for example, if there's an infant or a toddler, where they themselves or the parent has a diagnosis, it really is similar. You know, they feel the changes in the routine. They might be sensing that something's different. Someone who's a primary caregiver may not be around as much. And they really experience that, and you can sort of sense that they're having that reaction through their eating and sleeping habits might change. They might be exhibiting a lot of separation anxiety, crying, you know, just when mom leaves the room. I worked with a family where the older sibling had a cancer diagnosis and was long-term in the hospital. Mom was away from home with this, you know, the ill child in the hospital, and the other caregiver was home with the well child. And whenever mom was around, if mom stepped out of the room to use the bathroom, or even just slightly out of sight, that infant began to cry, and sort of display feelings of anxiety through, you know, their tears, to say, you know, come back, I'm missing you, I need you, and I'm sensing that you've been gone. So even if you think, you know, an infant or a toddler really doesn't understand, they do to a degree.
That's so interesting, because yeah, I would think as a parent, I would think, oh, an infant for sure. I mean, one thing if the infant's the patient, but to just be in the home, like somebody else is taking care of them. So that's very insightful, that they could have that much of an impact just by the disruption, which makes sense, right? But just the disruption of the routine.
Absolutely, absolutely. They really feel those changes. So then moving into, you know, preschool age, 3 to 5 years old, they understand when someone's sick, right? You know, cough or a cold, but we try to avoid words like sick when it comes to cancer or another diagnosis, because we want to label it what it is, because it differs. It's not a cough or a cold. It's not a stomach ache that's going to, you know, go away quickly. This is really something different. So helping that child, you know, understand that cancer is something that is different. At this age, they're engaging in a lot of magical thinking. So I can't tell you how many times I worked with kids where they think that their diagnosis or the diagnosis of a loved one was caused by them acting out or misbehaving. And so really, you know, helping that child to understand that you can't cause something like cancer, even if you were naughty and you maybe had an extra cookie that day and didn't tell somebody. The cancer cannot be caused, and they do engage in a lot of that magical thinking. One thing we see a lot in this age is regressive behaviors. So maybe acting younger than their chronological age, but developmentally maybe they're, you know, a child who was, you know, able to say their ABCs or able to, you know, hold their bladder and not have accidents. They might start doing those things again. So that's sort of a behavior to look out for, and be aware that, you know, the child might be struggling and having a difficult time. Separation anxiety is still prevalent for these children. They just might express it in a different way. Rather than crying like an infant or toddler, they might be having temper tantrums when you leave the room, or really clinging to the parent a lot more. One thing that we also see a lot is through their play. There's a lot of different themes and things related to, you know, if illness or hospitalization is present in their life, that might be a really common recurrent play theme. They might be sort of showing you through their play what they're having a difficult time with. So maybe playing with a doll, and the doll is getting stabbed over and over and over again with this painful needle. That could be telling of a needle phobia, or something that they've seen or experienced that's really difficult for them.
One thing that you said when you started that I had never thought of before, and it's interesting because I am very conscious of the language we use. And, you know, as my daughter was going through cancer, became very conscious of our language that you mentioned. I heard you say not using the word sick when it comes to cancer. And as you were saying that, I thought that's so interesting because, if you use that word, now that kid goes to preschool and it's like, oh, well, why isn't Susie here today? Well, she's sick. And that could be very terrifying. Like, oh, Susie has cancer now, you know, if I'm not feeling well and I say I'm sick, that extreme. So that's something I think that I haven't heard very many people mention. And I think as a family member to be really conscious of using.
Language really matters, definitely.
Yeah. So interesting.
Very concrete figures.
Yeah. Okay. So moving into an older child who's more like elementary school age.
Yeah. So our school age kids, those are about 6 to 8 years old. They may have misconceptions about cancer, things that they're hearing, like you said, in school. When kids don't get answers from us on something, they're smart and they're curious, and they're gonna go find that answer. So whether it's something they hear in school, I mean, they're even starting to Google stuff. So really, we want to make sure that they're getting their answers from us, and that's something that we'll dive into a little bit more when we come back around through the interventions by age. They're still engaging in that magical thinking. Those same regressive behaviors could still be prevalent. We could see a 6 or 8-year-old that is bedwetting, or something that they maybe were doing when they were much younger and are doing again. At this age, they're typically asking a lot of questions. So we want to make sure that they're getting the answers to those questions in an appropriate way. And one thing that starts to come up is the understanding of something being contagious. So oftentimes I'll have kids think that they can catch cancer. And it's something that, my classmate has cancer. Am I going to catch cancer from this peer of mine? So it's really important that we reiterate that this is not something that's contagious. It's not like, again, being sick and having that cough and that cold. It is a very different thing where some people have cancer and some people don't, and we don't have control over that.
And I would also think if the child is the patient, they're afraid that maybe they could get their brother or sister sick with their cancer.
Absolutely.
So on both sides. Okay, so it's great. So then what happens as they get now into the teens?
Preteens. You're going through that now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, I'm about to have the high schoolers. But yeah, middle school's interesting.
Yeah, so they're starting to have a more basic understanding of cancer. They've heard the word, they've seen, maybe some commercials or things that they're starting to catch on in terms of what cancer means. Maybe they know someone in their life, like a grandma or a grandpa, and they start to sort of develop more of a correlation to what cancer means and how it differs from being sick. But they could still have plenty of misconceptions that come up, things that they hear in school. Maybe they know one person who's had cancer who's lost their hair, and maybe they know someone else who doesn't lose their hair because that's not their course of treatment. So helping to make sure that they're understanding really what this cancer means. There's many different types of cancers, as we know, different treatments, different side effects. So we want to make sure that there's a clear understanding of the cancer that's in their life and how it's going to impact them. They might overhear things. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with families that, we assume that they don't know, and they do. They hear everything, they see everything, and they fill in the blanks. So making sure that they're getting that open and honest communication, and again, that we'll come back to that with interventions and ways to support children in their emotions.
And that fill in the blank piece, I think, is really key, because I'm seeing this even outside of the cancer world. When they don't know something, there's so easy access now to be able to Google and search, and it's not even on a computer anymore. Most of these kids have smartphones, and they can go, and you have no idea what they're looking at and stuff. So, because I know for my daughter and I, outside of even cancer stuff, it's been very much like, if you have a question about something, come to me, because I don't want her to Google something and see an image that I don't want her to see. Right. The other thing that was interesting, that as you were saying that, what?
And it could be completely inaccurate what they're finding.
Right. So I say to her, you may not know, or your friend. That's the other thing. We have that conversation. Don't ask your friend, because your friend may not know all of the information. It might give you half. One of the things I was thinking when you were saying that too is, based on what that child has been exposed to before, because I do think by the time we're in middle school in today's world, most kids have heard cancer. They've been exposed to somebody, a mom, even if it's not in their family, a friend's mom had cancer or somebody's grandparent. And as you were saying that, I was thinking it's interesting because it's going to be based on what that experience was that they'll take into it. So for example, since my daughter's a cancer survivor, she doesn't believe that everybody who has cancer passes away, right? She knows lots of kids who have cancer who have survived, and she goes to camp with them and socializes with them and stuff. So for her is, yes, some people, die from cancer, and she knows that, but not everybody does, right? And it's been interesting as she's had friends who have had parents who've gotten a diagnosis. Those kids who maybe haven't been exposed to the cancer world, their instant thought is everybody who has cancer dies, right? Because I know she's had some conversations of like, well, that's not really true because I'm here, And so being being aware of, what I think what their exposure was to cancer prior to having it now. What did they bring to the table? Because I'm sure that's going to hugely affect their fear, their understanding, their questions, because of whatever they had heard before. Both my mother and my daughter had cancer, and both are survivors. So she has a different perspective than if my mother had passed away from cancer and then she got cancer, right? So
their experience is exactly what paints, that's they know what they've seen.
Right. So I'm being really, I think, aware of that. Okay. So then you get into teenagers.
Mhm. That's the fun age. So they're really figuring out their identity and who they are. They're beginning to express themselves a lot more. They're gaining independence. And you think about a kid who is just starting to drive maybe, and they're gaining that independence, and then they're diagnosed with cancer and they're in the hospital, and pretty much all of what they just figured out for themselves is stripped away from them. They're in a hospital where they're being woken up during the night. Nurses are constantly coming in and out. So there's a lot of different ways that we can continue to foster that independence and that self-discovery even while they're still in the hospital. They're really struggling with balancing being close to their family when mom or dad might have a cancer diagnosis, and they want to be close and they want to be supportive and they want to spend that time with mom and dad, but their peers are the most important thing in the world to them right now. So it's figuring out, how do I balance that? How do I still spend time with my friends and do the things that I want to do, but be there for my family, which is really a difficult struggle. And it's sort of that first foray into being an adult and making those adult decisions, which can be really difficult. And also we see a lot of frustration and anger sort of displaced here. So, taking out their feelings and their emotions on the sick parent because they really may not have an appropriate outlet or a way to sort of express that.
And I think, I see this just even with my daughter, and she's a young teen at 13. So I would imagine as you get to a 16, 17, 18-year-old, we kind of expect them to be mini adults.
Yeah.
And, it was interesting. They came out with, we used to think the brain was fully developed by 19. And now we know that the frontal lobe, the long-term, that makes your long-term consequences, doesn't really develop until, if you don't know this, until you're 25 years old. So your brain is still developing until 25 years old. So I always have to remind myself, my daughter only has half a brain, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but sometimes I'll even say to her, I'm like, well, you have a parent because you don't have a full brain yet, because and that's why teenagers engage in risky behavior and have this idea that it can't happen to me. And it's not just that they're a teenager, but that physical part of their brain has not developed yet. Right. Mm-hmm. And so even a kid who's maybe 17 or 18 years old that we're looking at as you're an adult and you should be able to handle the way that I'm handling as an adult, and reminding ourselves they're really not. And they're actually a number of years away from having a fully formed adult brain. Absolutely. Right? Just because legally we make them an adult doesn't mean that physically they have that capacity. And maybe then rather than reacting in frustration, still kind of stepping back and looking at this is still not an adult. Because I could see that being very frustrating as a parent, being like, why are you behaving this way? You're 18 years old or you're 17 years old. You need to be more supportive. You need to be more this. And
even as an adult, those things are hard for us, right?
Yeah.
So putting ourselves in their shoes and saying, well, if I was, put in this position, how would I feel? What would my reaction be? And sort of give yourself that moment to step back and realize, well, even though they are an adult or being treated as an adult, we even struggle with these things.
Yeah. And that long-term effects, right? They're not thinking. It's kind of like when you're 18 and 19, 30 seems so old. That's an old person, right? And then as you get older, you're like, 30 is not really that old, right? So yeah, that understanding for sure. So, okay, understanding that kids really based on their brain development, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where they're at in their development process is going to understand a cancer diagnosis differently. How do you then switch to support a child who's really young versus a teen? And even if you're a parent who has maybe multiple ages of children in your home and you're trying to navigate through, I've got a 3-year-old, I've got a 6-year-old, I've got an 11-year-old, they're all at different spots.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that I just want to highlight here is they're all at different ages and stages, maybe, in terms of what you're dealing with. But remembering that your child best is so important, and their individual personalities matter here too. It's not just one size fits all because they're an infant or a toddler or they're, a middle schooler. Remembering who they are as a person and not just, oh, well, my child copes really well in the past with this. So I just want to put that sort of caveat to everything that I'm sharing here is always remember sort of who that child is, what's worked for them in the past, and weave that in. So going back to that infancy and that toddler age, we talked about how they're really struggling with the changes in their routine, sort of the norm and what they're used to might look different. So really just trying to encourage and facilitate any sort of stability and routine where possible. So keeping up with bedtimes, I know that that can be a challenge sometimes with treatment schedules and whatnot, but as much as we can, have those same routines, read that same book before bed or whatever song that we like to sing before bedtime, really continuing to make those things a priority can help with that stability and feeling like, okay, some things are different, but I have what I'm used to, pieces of what I'm used to.
So really, when I hear you keep using this word routine, I'm almost picturing in my mind like rituals, like these little ritual things that you do all the time that feel comforting because I understand that ritual.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So those preschoolers, the magical thinking is really the big piece here. So reminding that child that they cannot cause the cancer, even if they're not expressing, that thought or that fear, it's good to kind of plant that seed so that if it does, come down the road, they already know that information, constant reminders even still, or maybe they're just not even sharing it. They could be internalizing that they were really naughty and they don't want to tell you that, obviously. So they're not going to explain to you, oh, mommy, I was a bad girl and that's why, so-and-so has cancer. Because think of how crippling that must feel and how sad, how scary that is for a child to think. So they may not even be sharing with you that they're having that thought. So just by planting that seed can really help.
So what I'm hearing from you is even if you're not hearing that from your preschooler, that's something that you should really bring up regardless to just remind them, even if you don't think that's a thought they've ever had.
Exactly. And as we talked about before with their play and the things that are coming out in their play, they may not be directly telling you these things, but maybe they're kind of showing you or they want you to see, what it is that they're thinking and feeling through their play. So being really attentive to that, trying to kind of hear what are the themes that are recurring, and then from there addressing those misconceptions. So saying, oh, I heard you playing with your dolls, and this doll gave that doll cancer, and is that something that you think can really happen? And that's a really great gateway and opportunity to address the things that they're saying and feeling, even if they're not so outwardly able to express themselves in their words with you. So going on to those school age kids. So they are also still engaging in that magical thinking. So continuing to be aware of that and planting that seed and having those conversations is really important. But they're starting to ask a lot more questions and they're starting to grasp more difficult concepts, as we talked about before. So making sure that, this is where trust is developed. So using words like cancer and being completely honest. I work with a lot of families where, maybe they don't use the word cancer and then it comes up or it's overheard and mom and dad are not trying to do anything wrong or misguide that child. But one thing I've noticed is as adults, the word cancer, for you and I, it's the norm, it's our lives, it's our work, and we hear it and say it ad nauseum. But for most people, it's a terrifying word. And it almost creates this physical reaction to it. We sort of see people kind of go like this when you say cancer. And we want to normalize that word when it's a part of our lives. So calling it what it is, using the word cancer. I just had an example from a mom that was so profound. She told her son, you have leukemia, but the word cancer just never came up. And finally, one day it crossed, his radar, and he turned him on and he said, "Do I have cancer?" She said, well, yeah, I told you you have leukemia. But in his little brain, that's not the same thing. And he felt like he said, "You lied to me." And of course mom didn't, and that wasn't intentional. But the word cancer had just not been used at that point. And so feelings of trust and being open and honest with your child, that really fosters, that relationship at an early stage. So just being aware of, like we talked about, the language, but also, how are they going to perceive what is the truth? Yes, this child has leukemia, but he doesn't understand that it is a cancer. So, just being aware of our language.
And I know one of the things, because, we're working on with Making Cancer Fun, a workbook for children that you've been instrumental with helping and giving feedback on. And one of the things that I heard from you and the other doctor who was working on it was that often when kids are asking kind of these tough questions, as parents, we want to maybe distract. We don't want to necessarily answer that tough question, particularly if it's a question like, can I die? Or are you going to die? And so our thing is, well, rather than feel really uncomfortable or I'm not sure how to answer that, I am not sure what to say, let's kind of change the subject, and that can actually be scarier for the child, because then we're not answering those questions. And so one thing I do want to point out, because, again, having this feedback from you and some other people, and well, what do you do as a parent? Because I know for me, when my daughter first asked me at, 4 years old, can I die? I had no idea. Like somebody had said to her, oh, well, even after you have a bone marrow transplant, you can still die. And I came back after lunch and she said, did you know after a bone marrow transplant, I can die? And we had never even had that conversation because she was 4. And I really had no idea. And I'm good on my feet, right? And I was so taken back and was like, I'm not sure how to, because I don't want to lie to her, and again, what does dying mean to a 4-year-old means something different to a 14-year-old or an 18-year-old. So this is where I think as parents, we really need to reach out to those support systems like our child life specialists, like a social worker, and saying, what, it's okay for us as parents to say, what, I'm not entirely sure on how to answer that question. So who could we ask?
Yes.
Can we, and then what I think too, that kind of shows your kid that you're in it together. Like, hey, we're in this together. I don't always know the right answer either, but we can always find out. There's always somebody who does. Exactly. And the way our child life specialist came in and kind of supported me is she said, as long as we're still doing treatment, as long as if you're still here in the hospital and we're still giving you chemo, then that's because that no one here believes that you'll die. We have no reason to believe that you'll die. If that were to change, we would tell you and your mom.
Absolutely.
And so it was honest, but it took that fear away. That, as long as you're still here and we're still, quote, fighting cancer, right, then it's because we believe as the medical team that you are going to live. And it was a very sweet way that I felt comfortable with that answer because it was honest, but it took the fear away. So I think as family, as parents, we need to take advantage of those support people like you who have had these questions probably thousands of times, where we've had it one time and it shocked us.
And it's okay to say, I don't know. I think that's perfectly fine. As parents, there's the assumption that you have to know everything or you have to have the answers.
Yeah.
It's okay to say, I don't know, but let me find that answer for you. The piece that really matters there is that follow-up. It's not just saying, I don't know the answer and hoping that the question disappears. It's going to keep kind of going on in their mind, and they may not ask it again, but they could still be wondering, and they're waiting for you to come back to them. So you really need to make sure that follow-up happens. Because again, like I said, that's building trust and the knowledge that, okay, I asked mom this question, I know she's going to come back to me with an answer.
And not just saying that to avoid answering.
Exactly. And that's what we're here for. I get tons of parents who call me and they're diagnosed with cancer and they don't even know how to tell their kid. There's no manual. You don't come equipped with how to have conversations like this. And that's what people like me are here for, to help you say, okay, so how old is your child? What is your diagnosis? What do we know? And how do we have that conversation? We may not have all the answers right now, but we can sort of figure out how to address this with the child in steps, and we'll work through that together.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so next age group.
Yes, so we're hopping back to those middle schoolers. So they struggle with how to express themselves. So we want to create as many appropriate opportunities for expression as possible, whether that be encouraging something through art or verbal conversation, creating a space where they feel like they can come to us. So whether that's a family meeting or just a quick check-in, hey, how are you doing? I haven't heard how you're feeling. Do you want to talk about it? Do you not want to talk about it? That's another place where we can incorporate choice, which is a common thread through all ages and stages, is facilitating that choice, because really this is something that is happening to them. None of us choose for cancer to be in our lives. That's very clear. But what can we do to facilitate choices and allow for the child to have a role? Do you want to talk about it or not? Do you want to have a quiet space in the house where you can go and that's your we know that you're having your time that you need for yourself? Do we have a family code word? What is that word? Even that process of coming up with that word can be helpful. And maybe if the conversation's going to a place where the child needs a break or they want to stop, I say whatever that word, you know, it might be a really silly word that in another language that the family, you know, knows, or maybe it's something as simple as pineapple. I don't know. But whatever it is that works for that family, allowing the kids to be a part of that process of deciding rather than dictating for them. This is how we're going to express ourselves. This is how we're going to talk as a family. We have to talk as a family at this time, at, you know, dinner time or what have you, because this is really something that was, you know, it came into their lives without you know, them maybe wanting it, and we need to figure out, you know, how can you play a role and gain that mastery.
Great. I love it.
So then we've got our teens again, and they're still figuring out, you know, who the heck am I? How, you know, they're balancing. So allowing them those opportunities to be with their peers, and yes, family time is so important, but how are we going to facilitate, you know, allowing them, giving them that permission, you know, go be with your friends, go spend that time and enjoy, and because they're still kids, right?
Yeah.
Like we talked about before, they're sort of moving into adulthood, but they're still figuring it out, and they really still are kids. It was interesting. We run teen groups in the local area high schools. We find that going to them seems to be more attractive and allows creating the space for them to disclose. And we really think that teens don't want to talk, or that they have no interest in sharing their feelings with us. And they've shown us that that's not the case. They want to be checked in. You know, I had a group of kids just yesterday, and we were talking about responsibilities and the weight that's on them. And I said, you know, if you could tell your parent one thing that you'd want to change, or what you want to see from them, what is it? And unanimously, they all wanted their parents to check in. You know, they said, it's really hard for me to come to them and say I'm feeling this way. They might feel embarrassed, and they really need us to sort of guide that even still. So just by checking in, you know, how was your day today? How are you feeling? You know, those conversations, they actually want to have them more than we realize.
Well, that's so interesting. And I'm thinking even outside of cancer, we just assume if they're not talking to us, because that means that they don't want to talk. And really what they're telling you is, I do want to talk. I just don't want to be the one to start the conversation.
It can be scary. You know, they go downstairs with a plan in their head that they're going to ask about this, and maybe it becomes a little daunting, and they don't want to, it's not cool to share those feelings.
Yeah.
So by creating that space for them to do so, where they feel respected and heard.
Yeah. I think also a fear. Go ahead.
Even just by asking, I mean, they may not even take the bait in that moment, but keep trying, you know, it helps for them just to know that you're there and that you're listening and that you want to know how they're doing.
I think that's also where, as we as parents, we have to really check ourselves and make sure that when kids are asking us a question, that we're not reacting in a way that's going to shut them down to not want to ask again. And I've learned this particularly more as Emily's gotten older, and they've been other types of questions that aren't about cancer. I don't want to ever have her be like, "Oh, I asked something, Mom, I really shouldn't have asked," right? Because Mom responded so like, you know, that then she doesn't ask me again. So, and I will say that as a cancer mom, I think because you go through so much stuff physically with your child, and you're so open about your body and physical stuff, that they feel very comfortable asking you lots of questions as they become teenagers, maybe more so, which is great. And I appreciate that. But I have definitely had to work on the like zero reaction, straight face to be able to ask questions, because I want her to continue to come to me and ask questions, right? And so with cancer, we bring in as our parents, you know, all of these own emotions, particularly if it's a new diagnosis. You know, like you and I can talk about cancer very comfortably now, but as a new diagnosis, even just saying that word makes you want to vomit sometimes. And so if our kids feel like, I'm going to say something and Mom's going to start crying, or Dad's going to get angry or whatnot, they're not going to ask those questions. One thing, and I've never thought about this before, but just as you were talking, you know, I didn't have a teenager. So I had a child who was in that wonderful age of 3-4 years old, where everything was magical and we could make it really fun and silly and light, right? Because it didn't have the heaviness. But I was thinking now, having a teenager and just seeing how she deals with life, I wonder if one tip is, if you have a kid who maybe isn't asking questions, is having a question jar in your house, and that you can anonymously, or as you think of them, write down questions to put in the question jar. And that way, if you have a couple different kids, maybe nobody knows who wrote the question. But even the parents could say, I have an opportunity that I could write questions down in there that I'd want to know. And then having a time that we go through that question jar, because I'm wondering if just writing the question down and putting it in there takes some of the fear away of asking the question versus having to verbalize that. And that might be a great way to figure out, like, what are some of the thoughts that are going on in the family, because you talked about having, family time and stuff like that. And for a teenager, it might be easier. Or giving a notebook and say, as you have questions, here's a notebook and you can write those things down. And then when you're ready, we can talk about them. Or we don't even have to talk about them. You can just give me the notebook so I have an idea of some of the things that you are thinking about.
Or if that child expresses, they're not comfortable bringing it to mom or dad, maybe they don't want to add any pressure, or, they know that if mom or dad's going through something difficult, they don't want to add to that. Who are the people in their life that they can go to outside of mom or dad? It doesn't have to be the primary caregiver. Who's someone that they really trust at school, encouraging that and helping them to know, these are the people that you can go to talk about these things and get the right answers, or just to express yourself.
That's really great. That's really great. I think one of the things that we had talked about is that the common thread of all of these ages, and even as us as an adult, right? It's that cancer throws us in a world where we lose control. And that loss of control is so incredibly scary. And whether that's, an infant that now I can't control that mom's not here, or a young kid who's like, I can't control my circumstances, or a teenager, right? Teenagers want control. My daughter tells me all the time, she's like, I just want to be the boss. I just want to control, right? They just have this need for control. And we know this is as adults and as parents, when getting a childhood cancer diagnosis is there's zero control. You basically have come into a world where there is none. And I would say even more so than if it's your own cancer diagnosis, because at some extent, my own cancer diagnosis, I can control my thoughts, my feelings, how I'm going to choose to respond. Even as an adult, I get to choose if I'm going to take this treatment or not take this treatment. I was recently talking to a woman who went through breast cancer diagnosis, and she was given 3 options for treatment, right? And it was really up to her what she chose she wanted to do. And while that's very scary, we always feel better when we have control. A child, my daughter had no choice in any of her treatment. I chose her treatment for her. She had no choice about which chemos she was going to get, or whether they were going to poke her, or whether we were going to, I had signed her up on an optional to do immunotherapy at the end, because she had such a low cure rate that it was, this, will help the cure rate, but it's pretty dangerous. She had no choice on that. And so I think anything that we can do that makes our kids and us feel like we have control. And that's how you and I connected, because my thing really became that fun was how I chose to take control back. It was like, I can't change the experience. I can't change. She had a very low cure rate. I can't change if she's going to live or die. I can't change. And in our case, it wasn't even in childhood cancer, everything's based on protocol. So it's not even a choice of, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? It's kind of like, if you get this diagnosis, here's your roadmap, right?
Absolutely.
So in our case, there wasn't even like getting second opinions or anything like that. She was in such a critical pace. It wasn't even like, okay, take her to another doctor, maybe just get a second opinion. It was like, let's see if we can save this child's life. She was literally, dying in an emergency room. So when you have zero control, you have to kind of go, okay, what can I control? And that's where I think the work that you do, and where I talk about is, okay, you can control the experience. You can't control the outcome, but you can control how you as a family are going to face this experience. And we're going to face this, and we're going to still choose fun, and we're still going to, be light about it. And cancer, like you said, it's that weight of what we put on it. My daughter doesn't have that weight with cancer. And it's been interesting as she's gotten older, she's learned that that's a trigger word for people. And so if she's mad, she'll like throw it out there. I'm like, Em, you can't like throw the cancer word around.
She survived cancer, and how cool is that I survived cancer? And
I don't think she truly understands what that means. She's like, cancer. Yeah, people get cancer. Like, to her, it's like, I had strep throat, right?
The world, it's the experience of cancer is absolutely shaped by what we've seen and heard and experienced.
Yeah. And so I love what you're talking about is like, how do we emotionally, because the emotional piece is so much bigger. We were talking before we started recording about a study of men who had had heart attacks, and they said whether they were pessimistic or optimistic. And then they went back after 8 years to find the percentage that had died and after that first heart attack. And they found that simply having hope, just that whether those people who were optimistic and had hope increased their survival rate 300% and was a better indicator of long-term survival than their medical records, which I thought was crazy. And obviously this isn't a heart attack, but Jesse and you and I were talking about like how having that hope and having that, that hope is so significant, and we can get hope through support, through doing things like gratitude journals, from plugging into something like Cancer Support Community, where you have a community of hope around you. Cancer Support Community provides a lot of other, classes and ways to connect for the kids and for the families and to have that support system. Having fun in a time that seems like I shouldn't be having any fun is actually the time that you need to have the most fun. And that children live in this world that they laugh, they giggle, and they have fun. And we want to keep that in that world as much as possible. Yeah. So as we finish up, I do want to let people know how they can, find you and find me and have any sports. Is there any last minute advice or tips or hope you want to give somebody?
I think just the overall takeaway that I want families to walk away from this with is that, while yes, we're experts in this field and we understand age and development, that you are the expert in your child. You know your child better than anyone else. So you can take, nuggets of what we've shared today and match that up with, well, I know my child does really well with X, Y, or Z, or they really enjoy this. Let's incorporate that all together, because, as much as we can guide, you are the ones that are there day in and day out, and you know what you're doing. I think that reminder of you've got this and you know what you're doing is so important.
Yeah, that's huge. And that's so empowering as a parent, right? To feel like, okay, I do know more than I think I know, right? So we will have the links below where you can find Cancer Support Community in New Jersey. If you're not in New Jersey, they are all over the country. And so you can plug in and find those there. And I would encourage you to get on their mailing list and subscribe so that you can find out what the events are in the area. One thing Jessie said right in the beginning is she said, you get this childhood cancer diagnosis, you get a cancer diagnosis, there is no manual. I'm going to disagree. There is one now. And we were talking because Jessie said, well, what do you want parents to know? What helped you get through cancer when your daughter was diagnosed? And I said, well, you're going to joke, because I remember going and looking for books and being like, there is nothing. There is no manual. Somebody just tell me what to do. Like, I just didn't know what to do. Right. And so from suggestions and my background, for those of you who don't know me, was actually in theater, childhood theater, improv, and the personal development world. So I had a completely different, all the medical stuff, and you have this background. I had none of that, but I did know how to have fun. And so that's kind of where this came from. And that's my daughter now. And that was her, when she was little. Yeah. And so if you feel like I have a kid and I don't know what to do, and I've even had adults who have read the book, and just to have that takeaway of what do I do? How do I take some control? And that's what I did. I share with what did I actually do to kind of take control back for myself, even before I knew what the outcome was going to be. I didn't know if my daughter was going to live or not, but I wanted to make sure that if she didn't, whatever time I had with her was as fun as possible. And so if you subscribe to Making Cancer Fun, you can go to our website, makingcancerfun.com, find out more about that. You can also subscribe for our newsletter. We try to put out great things that maybe nonprofits in your area are doing, or resources for parents. We do webinars. We bring on experts like Jessie to be able to share with our community and have that expertise in your home that you can watch on your own. You can find both, Cancer Support New Jersey and Making Cancer Fun on all the social media. And one thing that we love to do is focus on, we do called Miracle Kid Monday. So when we were talking about hope, every Monday we feature a cancer survivor who is a long-term cancer survivor. And as a mom, for me, that's what I wish I had had. I wanted to see those people who had gone through cancer, and it was a season in their life, but it wasn't a sentence. They were able to go on and live a great life. And so we appreciate you being on today. Thank you, Jessie, for sharing. And we're trying to find ways to be able to reach, the families who need this information. And hopefully this webinar will be something that we can continue to do. Well, it's okay. Our time is up. Somebody's calling. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Talk to you later.